So we'll start the section off by learning the very simplest and most fundamental things, like how to select stuff. And we'll also go over what active selections are. And we'll start with the basic selection tools. As of Blender 2.8, selecting is now left click. But you can change that back to right click by going into the Preferences menu. And in the Key Map tab here, you have the select preference right there, left or right click. Now holding Shift will add to the selection when you click on something else. And you'll notice the last object selected has a brighter outline than the other ones. That's because that object is the active selection, which simply means it was the last object that was selected. Now there are lots of different reasons it's useful to have an active selection, and all of which we'll go over throughout the course, but just to demonstrate real quick, if I switch the pivot point here to active element, then rotation will happen around wherever the active selection is. So whichever object is the active selection is where things are rotating around now. And let me reset that. And again, there's other reasons we'll get into as needed throughout the course. So moving on, pressing A will select everything, and double tapping A will deselect everything. You can also press Alt and A to deselect everything, or you can simply left click in a blank area. Now to deselect just a single object, you can hold Shift and click on it, and once it's the active selection, then you can hold Shift and click on it again and it will deselect. And next up, Control and I will invert the selection. That's pretty standard. And if you have the box select tool enabled in the toolbar over here, then you can simply left click and drag, and everything inside that box becomes selected. But only what's inside that box becomes selected. For example, if I left click and drag over those two objects, they're the only ones that remain selected, and this one gets deselected. To add to your selection, you would hold Shift and then left click and drag. And to subtract from your selection, you would hold Control and then left click and drag. You can also press the B key for the box select tool, and then you just left click and drag over whatever you want to select. This tool works a little differently when you use the hotkey for some reason, and I don't know why, but every time you press B to make a new selection, it will just add to your current selection. For example, if just that's selected, and I press B, and left click and drag over that, it adds to the selection instead of just selecting this one. And then to subtract from your selection, you would press B, and then middle click and drag over what you want to deselect. So that works a little bit differently, and I'm not sure why. But honestly, I prefer using the B hotkey because I think that tool works better. Okay, let's move on to circle select now. Now there is a circle select option in this menu right here, but we're going to use the hotkey version of this. So let's press the C key to activate circle select. So now when you left click, if anything is inside the circle, it becomes selected. Now one thing to be aware of though is that when working in object mode, the object's origin point must be within the circle to become selected. The origin point is this orange dot in the middle of the objects, and we'll go over more about that later in this section. But for example, over here, the object origin for the cube is somewhere in the middle, so if I left click and drag on the outside of the cube, it doesn't get selected. I have to click and drag over where that origin point is for that to become selected. This is different than box select. With box select, you can select any part of the object, but circle select is a little more picky. Okay, so moving on to deselect in this mode, you would simply middle click and drag over the origin points. And finally, you can make the circle radius larger or smaller by scrolling on the mouse wheel. And then when you're finished your selection, you can simply right click. And next up now is lasso select. To enable that, we'll click and hold on that icon there for this menu, and then choose select lasso. And this is your basic lasso tool. You simply click and drag to draw a shape around any objects you want to select, and only those objects become selected in the end. And this is like the circle select tool. You need to make sure that the shape you draw encompasses the origin points of the objects. And now holding Shift and drawing a new shape will add to that selection, and holding Control and drawing a shape will subtract from the selection. Alright, and that's going to do it for the basic selection tools, and most of the selection tools can be found in the select menu up here as well. But that's going to do it for the selection tools for now, so I'll see you in the next lecture.